This is the English language section of Free Radio Europe, a European voice in your home. Welcome from the seat of the European Parliament in Strasbourg. And my very, very special guest today is the President of the European Parliament, Mrs. Metsola. Welcome to the show.
Very nice to be here. Thank you for having me, Radek. Thank you.
Very gracious of you to come on a day which is important in the life of the Parliament and possibly of the Union, because we have just voted through by a narrow majority as a report and a resolution which envisages a new future for the European Union. What do you think about it?
Well, absolutely. This is something that the Parliament has been pushing for a long time. It's not necessarily our negotiating mandate. It is our contribution to a debate that
so
we have
it's non-binding. Let us...
Let's just start by saying this is where the Parliament stands. If we look back at the last 4 years on health, shouldn't the European Union do a little bit more at its level? I would say so. On defence, on energy, can we pool in our resources? Can we learn from the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Energy union was a Polish idea originally.
Absolutely. And if you think about defence, about the fact that we pool in what we have in order to help countries on our neighbourhood that have been invaded by a very aggressive neighbour. These are things that have shown us that more needs to be done at European level. And now moving on to enlargement, for a big decision to take. Do we enlarge for Ukraine, for Moldova, for the Western Balkans? Is what works today for 27 workable for 32, for 33, for 35? This is what we voted on today, so I look forward to having the possibility to discuss with the presidents of the other institutions, prime ministers, heads of state and government. Some will want to go further, some will want to say this is too much, timing is key.
Countries will still have veto powers over what emerges from this process, right?
Yes, this is something that is very sensitive, that different countries, and I can already imagine that there will be several governments that will insist on keeping their veto powers, or if you will, the possibility for them to use their specific national circumstances to say, let's pause on something like this. But, you know, I would turn it around and say that we've had for a long time, and this was thanks to the European Parliament originally in the Lisbon Treaty, the possibility to vote quite a lot of things by qualified majority. But still, in the Council, governments tried a lot to move towards consensus. In other words, looking for governments to bring them closer to another. So it's very rare, actually, that individual countries would use their veto unless, and unhappily so, as is happening a little bit more often, that countries would hold subjects or issues hostage because they want something to go through for them.
Our delegation voted against, but I find that the idea of consensus being defined as 4/5 of countries is an interesting one.
Yes, I mean, it goes into the way the double majority principle in the current treaty operates. It's not very well known, but it's one where it will apply in order for you to have the right balance, if you will, between the larger countries and the smaller countries. This is where you come as a Pole, to me, as someone coming from a slightly smaller member state.
That's right. People who criticize this process in my country, in Poland, people who've just lost the election in Poland, are already attacking this process by saying that this leads to a superstate, domination by Germany or Germany and France, and literally, they say, the abolition of the statehood of smaller countries. Now,
yeah, I come from a particularly proud island.
and first of all, you know, here you are, coming from Malta, you're the president of the European Parliament. But how do you in Malta understand the relationship between sovereignty and influence?
You know, this was a discussion that we had 20 years ago, before your country and mine joined the European Union. Once you join a larger club, are you going to be swallowed up? The Eurosceptics at the time used to use that as the campaign for our people to vote no. In fact, the referendum passed by a very narrow majority. But as we have seen ever since in the past 20 years, is that not only does it matter that you're around a table, sometimes you could actually end up at the head of the table, and it requires more work. Of course, your voice sometimes needs to be a little bit louder, but it also means you need to find allies. And that's what the European Union is good at. and what we have managed through the pandemic, since the beginning of the Russian invasion, even now with the conflict in the Middle East and the Israel-Hamas war, that we've seen where we can move forward on what we have in common. So rather than go at such a discussion from a negative point of view, that you're going to be swallowed up, you'll be ignored, you're smaller, I would rather think that if you put all the smaller countries together, they're bigger than the largest ones.
And unanimity can play against you. For example, we had the delays in the imposition of sanctions on Russia because of some vetoes. Huh?
Yes, and that also meant that, and this is quite sensitive for some member states, that would say we need to keep the possibility for us to block certain proposals or even bring it to the European Council, the so-called emergency brake. Let's not forget Germany itself did that on the combustion engine, even though there had been a majority found in that area. There are still ways for you to press pause and say this is problematic for my industry, this is problematic for my sectors. What worries me, however, is that it is not a national element that you bring to the table to ask for a pause, but that you would use a veto in order to hold certain subjects hostage. This is the situation we have at the moment. This is what certain countries are using. And I think it would be interesting for us as we look back at the Conference on the Future of Europe, where we all came together, where could we go forward? What have we done in the past 2 years? What's the conversation going to look like as we decide, hopefully, on embarking on an enlargement path for Ukraine and Moldova and the Western Balkans in December? What do we do when we decide that? How do we grow here? How do we make sure that the European Parliament is on equal footing with governments, which is what has always happened when we negotiated treaties. Now, perhaps also to make it clear for who is still a little bit sceptical, you know, treaty change is not the be-all and end-all. We can do much more within the current framework, and that would also require a conversation that we would like to have happen, because so far it hasn't.
Let's reiterate that this non-binding resolution is just the beginning of a discussion and of the process.
Absolutely.
What do you think we can do as Europe more to prepare ourselves for aggressive Russia, particularly in view of the uncertain outcome of the American election next year?
Yeah, that is, of course, a concern. It's 1 year to go. If you take the recent let's say, upheavals in the Congress and the fact that their speaker election took so long and it was so difficult to find a majority.
And there are delays to the Ukraine appropriations bill.
And also the fact that the president so far, you know, we welcome the fact that he's still going ahead with his steadfast support for Ukraine, as has been from the very beginning of this war. Our transatlantic relationship, and you know this better than me, Radek, has never been stronger. You know, we are very much, at least from political angle, very much together, partners in this. And I would like to focus on that as we prepare for what might happen next year. We have elections in this parliament and we have elections in the United States. So far, you know, President Biden and his administration is going very much in lockstep with us. One would only hope that that continues.
Yes, indeed. I'm going to Washington myself next week to see what can be done. By when do you think, more or less, if the Ukrainians do all the right things, can they become a member?
It's very difficult to speculate dates, right? And it would be perhaps wrong for us to do it now, although what I do not want to have is an open-ended debate where countries, naturally so, like the Western Balkans, tell us we have been waiting. Elections are won and lost over the hope and dream of EU membership. The minute anyone from the EU, and here again it could be one European country, looks away, then it's a playing field for Russia and China to play around. We've seen it.
And they will not be deciding about that. Ukraine and we will be deciding.
Absolutely. So what we want to do, and this is why we should be proud of what the European Parliament has done from the very beginning, give Ukraine candidate status. They are not only fighting for their own sovereign and territorial integrity, but also for ours, for our values. I mean, I look forward to continue.
In the meantime, I hope we'll fund the Ukrainian state, we'll provide the funds for the recovery, and we'll provide the funds for the ammunition.
Yes, absolutely. That's why we are talking. We have a very crucial bill on the table, 50 billion euros. We've already voted on it. Now it's up to the governments to do what in effect, Radek, they agree on. All countries say that we should continue to help Ukraine and that the minute we show fatigue, Russia will take advantage, and we were not ready to do that. One would have thought, I'm sure Putin expected us to do that much earlier, but there is no way we are going to do it. So step by step. And the fact that Ukraine have shown us how fast they can be, even faster than our own countries were when they were asked even the same questions, and they were not at war when they started their path towards EU membership. Their speed has to be matched by ours. Every country has its own path. Every country has its own timeline, but I would say let's match each step with one of ours that they go through.
If I may end with the issue that is close to your heart, I know, because Malta has had its own problems with rule of law and with political murders and with tax havens, and you've been involved on all these issues. What do you think, as the EU, we can do to reduce those risks?
Well, my country, and I would say unfortunately, was one of those hit by a socialist government which was uncovered at having used just a few days after their election, if anything, I would say ours, in opening up shell companies where you would not be taxed with essentially evading what we had worked so hard for, because we're members of the European Union, to make sure that doesn't happen. So that really shocked the country to the core. It shocked me, my generation. We were brought up to say that we can be as good as anyone else. We fight corruption.
There is no reason to have tax havens. Their only purpose is to hide wealth or avoid taxation.
And when you have politicians involved, when you have politicians, that means that you yourself think you're above the laws that you pass. What kind of message do you give to those hard-working taxpayers that is being abused by the people who should be there to protect you in Parliament that you elected? And then, as you said, we had our, most unafraid, she had no fear, journalist called Daphne Caruana Galizia, because she was asking uncomfortable questions. She was one of those who revealed the Panama Papers. She did not want to let any question left unanswered. She was blown up. A mother, a courageous, fearless warrior.
The children are carrying on the mission.
Absolutely,
but we need rules to protect whistleblowers, to protect journalists, and to point out to member states when they err on the rule of law.
And that's what the European Parliament does, as we've been doing with the rule of law mechanism, pointing out to specific countries, what are you doing with the judiciary? How are you protecting your journalists? Making sure that, again, going back to my country, a Prime Minister had to resign over corruption allegations. That's all thanks to what happened here in the European Parliament, and that should give people hope.
Thank you very much for your time on this very busy day.
Thank you.
This has been the English language section of Free Radio Europe, a European voice in your home. If you've liked the show, please like it, pass it on, subscribe. Thank you and goodbye.